we've got a couple major injury shakeups at the wide receiver position that we're going to have to go through. And I always wait till Saturdays to go through every single matchup so we can get those injury updates. So we're going through every matchup, finding the must start and sit wide receivers for week 14 fantasy football. And I'm doing everything I can to get us ready on a Saturday to win championships this year. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now getting into our first matchup, it is the Garbage Bowl, the Toilet Bowl, the Tennessee Titans at the Cleveland Browns. Sorry to Titans and Browns fans, you have to know, your teams are not good. And I do think that my philosophy when it comes to wide receivers in this matchup is I prefer Browns wide receivers over Titans. And I'm very sorry to Titans fans, but Cam Ward just has not been good. I mean, the guy has thrown 7 touchdown passes this year. And yes, I understand Chimere Dike has had a couple good games, and I understand Elick has had a couple good games as well. So they're still flexible, but I would just prefer Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman and the breakout plays that they could possibly have with a guy with Shedeur Sanders who has a pretty big arm himself and has been able to hit it downfield a couple of times. So that's my philosophy. They're not far off in the rankings, and I can tell you this, they're not high upside flexes. They are very low upside guys that you probably should not be starting unless you are in dire straits. And Isaiah Bond and Van Jefferson, I'll put them on the bench. Let's move on to the next matchup. The Seattle Seahawks at the Atlanta Falcons. JSN a must start. Don't worry about last week. I don't expect the Falcons defense to shut him down like the Vikings did last week. Darnell Mooney, of course, since there is no Drake London again, I do think he's a flexible guy. Do I think he's high in flex? Not at all. The Seahawks matchup is already brutal against the wide receiver. And number 2, this guy just hasn't done very good because Kirk Cousins is in fact Mermaid Man. I was right about that. And Darnell Mooney just hasn't been that good this year. So I don't think that there's anything moving the needle for him as far as being a high-end flex option. I think if anything, he's a mid-tier flex option at best. Cooper Kupp I still think is flexible. I would say he's the best flex option at this point in Seattle, outside of JSN, of course. But I wouldn't say that he's like a high-end guy. I mean, at best, you'll maybe get like a 15-point game out of him. But that's like the very best, and they haven't happened that many times this year. So I wouldn't say count on him as like a good flex option. I would play Mooney over him, but he's really not that far behind. They're both mid to lower tier flex options. I'll go ahead and put Rashid Shaheed on the bench. There just hasn't been any major developments yet since he's become a Seahawk. And David Sills, because there is no working passing game in Atlanta, is not going anywhere near my lineups. The Indianapolis Colts at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Michael Pittman Jr., this is a scary week because I do feel like the Jags' strength of that team is the passing game. So I'm a little worried to put him in must start, but just because it's mostly worked. Their offense has been so efficient. He's been a red zone threat. I'm going to keep him in must start territory because it does feel a little crazy to not have him in must start territory, kind of based on what he's done this year. Jacoby Myers, though, is my favorite Jag of the week. I mean, Brian Thomas Jr., the guy, it's just not good. I mean, all I've seen all year is just a bunch of drop passes, low effort plays. And yes, last week he had some higher effort plays. But the bottom line is at the end of the day, Jacoby Myers has been better in a short period of time with Trevor Lawrence than BTJ has with Trevor Lawrence for 2 years now. Because if you remember, Brian Thomas Jr. had his best moments with Mac Jones last year, not with Trevor Lawrence. So it just doesn't work very well, in my opinion, with him and Trevor Lawrence for whatever reason. And I just would kind of rather just move off of it and just go with Jacoby Myers at this point. And I'd even go with Alec Pierce over Brian Thomas Jr. Once again, that's a little bit of a risk because the Jags, again, I do see their passing defense as the strength of that defense. So it's not like Alec Pierce is going to be just eating them up. I don't think that's the case. I think what you can rely on here is a couple catches and like a big play for maybe like 5 catches and 100 yards or something like that. Either way, those two guys are riskier flex options, but Jacoby Myers is definitely a high-end flex. Josh Downs, I'll sit him down because it just hasn't worked very well lately. And with the decline of Daniel Jones and the tougher passing defense he's going against, I don't love the matchup. And Parker Washington, I just don't feel like he's going to be involved enough with a full game because last week he got injured early. So it's kind of cheap to say he was no good last week, but I'll go ahead and take my chances with other guys in this matchup. The Washington Commanders at the Minnesota Vikings. Terry was already a must start. Like, either way, it was Marcus Mariota or Jaden Daniels. So Jaden Daniels is ruled in. He's going to play in this game versus the Vikings. Now it definitely locks in Terry as a must start. Like, I do think of Terry as a guy, when you look at him just from a per opportunity perspective, has done very well. The Vikings defense, yes, they did shut down Jackson Smith-Njigba last week. That's also because Seattle doesn't have a seriously viable number 2 wide receiver behind JSN. Washington does with Deebo Samuel. So I think Terry McLaurin is a must-start guy. Justin Jefferson, I mean, you all know the deal. I stopped putting him in the must-start territory because all he's doing is killing teams. I mean, if you made it to the playoffs, you made it in spite of Justin Jefferson. And I'm not trying to blame JJ. Obviously, he's a great player, but it's just the fact of fantasy. You're at a dependent position and you don't have a good quarterback. I'm going to sit you down if I can. And I can this week with other different matchups. Deebo Samuel, 1 spot ranked behind JJ. So you go ahead and you toss these 2 guys up. I could see where people were coming from if they'd rather play Deebo. I'd probably rather play JJ because I do think the floor is probably a little bit higher, but they're still very similar guys as far as floor to ceiling ratios. I think JJ's floor may be a little bit higher, but based on the last several weeks, that hasn't been the case. So maybe I'm wrong here. Either way, they're both in basically the same tier of higher end flex plays. Jordan Addison, I still think remains flexible even with the bad quarterback play because he's been a big play guy. I mean, even with JJ McCarthy, he's able to get in the end zone. It's just not for like 17 fantasy points. If anything, it's for like 10 or 12. So that's kind of what he has to do, and that's why he's moved way down in my rankings. But for that reason, I will say he's a lower tier flex option. I'll sit Treylon Burks. I know he had the highlight of his career last week. I'm not going to play him this week. And then Jalen Naylor obviously is going to be sat as well. This one's fun. The Cincinnati Bengals at the Buffalo Bills. Here's my thought process on this, and I didn't break it down enough in the quarterback rankings, so let me do it now. I was asked a lot of questions. Do I think the weather in this game, considering it's going to be probably a lot of snow in Buffalo this week, will impact either quarterback? My answer is no. When you look at 2 guys like Joe Burrow and Josh Allen, both have big arms, both play in this weather at this time of the year, it's not a question to me as far as can they do it. They've both proven time and time again they can do it. If you were to ask me Jacoby Brissett and Tyrod Taylor or Bo Nix in this kind of weather, I would say, yeah, I'm going to factor that into the rankings. But with Burrow and with Allen, I'm not going to care because those 2 guys have proven that they could do it in this kind of weather. So Jamar Chase, obviously you play him. T. Higgins coming back, you play him against the Bills. And then Khalil Shakir, and dare I say Keon Coleman is playable in this game. It just makes too much sense not to have another Bills wide receiver in playable territory. Because listen, at the end of the day, I don't know who it's going to be. It might be Gabe Davis. It might be Brandon Cooks. But one of those other receivers besides Khalil Shakir probably ends up doing something. I don't know. I could be wrong. Keon Coleman, though, did get a touchdown against the Steelers. Maybe he's making his way back into the lineup as a full-time player. I have no idea. I'd like to say you can count on Khalil Shakir, though, but you can't because even in great matchups, he has not done well. So it's one of those things in Buffalo you just don't know. But what you do know is that the high upside is definitely a part of that aspect there. And the matchup here obviously offers an enormous amount of upside. So both of these Bills wide receivers, in my opinion, are very flexible this week. Khalil Shakir, definitely a higher end play than Keon Coleman, but Keon is still somewhere in that mid-tier flex range. The New Orleans Saints at the Tampa Bay Bucks. If Olave plays, and I have no insight, even still, filming this at like 5 o'clock Central, if Olave is going to play, he may or may not play, but if he does play, I'll say he's a must-start because it's against Tampa's defense who has been bad against wide receivers in fantasy this year. But the way I look at this one is that Emeka Egbuka is no longer a must-start. I've been kind of discussing this over the last 2 weeks. I'm a big Emeka Egbuka guy. I've been defending him for a while. What my problem is with him is that he hasn't been efficient on the work. The work is still there. And Mike Evans is not coming back this week. So his work will still be there. Hence why he's a high-end flex. And one I prefer still over Godwin. But something's not working. I mean, whether it's like Buka always, or whether it's Baker and his inaccuracy issues this year and him struggling with injuries, I don't know what the case is, but it's not working. So I can't say that Emeka Egbuka is any longer a must-start guy until he proves that he can hit a 25-point ceiling again, which I believe he can, especially against the Saints. But I don't think it's a lock. Chris Godwin, I think, is a relatively solid flex option with Tez Johnson as well. They're back-to-back ranked right around wide receiver 40-ish range. So I do think they're higher-end flexes, but I don't think that they're very stable options. I think they both have lower floors and probably the same level of ceiling, which is like 16 to 17 points. Devon Vele, I think even with Olave, he's very flexible, and especially without Olave. If he was alone, he would be a better play than Godwin and Tez Johnson, in my opinion. I do believe what you saw with Devon Vele last week was not a flash in the pan, because he was relevant last year with the Broncos. And this was a guy I saw being relevant at some point this year, and finally it's starting to hit. So Devon Vele, keep your eye on this guy. I think he can be played either way, but no question, he's a lower end flex with Olave and a higher end flex without Chris Olave. Mason Tipton and Sterling Shepard will go ahead and sit those two guys down. The Pittsburgh Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens. So I got asked a couple times this week, why isn't Zay inside your top 30 wide receivers? Like, he is a guy who's been very consistent with his target share, and it's against the Steelers. Listen, my opinion on this is I'd rather play him over DK Metcalf, but they're right back-to-back in my rankings because neither of these guys are hitting ceiling games. I mean, Zay, I finally had a breaking point where I was like, I kept saying for like a month and a half, at some point he's going to hit the breakout game. And it hasn't happened. And then when he got negative points last week, I was like, you know what? I'm done with this one. So Zay, I'm not saying he's a bad play. The matchup's great. He is involved every single week. But Lamar, bottom line, is not fully healthy, and he's not providing massive upside for his receivers or tight ends right now. So I don't see the massive upside with him. Just like I don't see the big upside with DK anymore. I mean, at this point, DK is kind of a basement play, sort of like Justin Jefferson, where it's like, I don't think he will hit the upside. I think in theory he has a higher chance of hitting upside games than Justin Jefferson does. But the thing with JJ is I would say his floor is probably a little bit lower. But either way, man, I'd play Zay over DK, and then I would bench everybody else in this one. But let's put it to a vote really quick. I'm going to create a poll on fsroundup.com, my site, and I'm going to go Zay Flowers here. Then I'm going to go to Chad. Then I'm going to go to start a poll for Week 14, and I'm going to add DK Metcalf. And I need you to go vote on this one. And let me know what you think, because they're back-to-back in my rankings, basically. You can't really go wrong with either of these two guys from the flex perspective, because I think they're both lower floor guys and probably lower ceiling guys as well. So let me know what you would do. Free to vote. Free to start your own poll, and if you want access to my top 250 rankings on a weekly basis, you want access to the automatic waiver feature, which is winning leagues this year for people, you want access to the comparison feature and the league sync-up feature on the site, you could do that with a premium subscription as well. Now, getting into our next matchup, the Miami Dolphins at the New York Jets. Interesting matchup, actually, I think. Jalen Waddle is not a must-start this week, and I would imagine there's going to be people either looking at me side-eyed on this one, or people just saying you're dumb. Because, listen, Jalen Waddle has done mostly good. The one thing I've always been right on, though, and you can't forget this, is that I say throughout the entirety of the season, you take Miami out of their element, you put them in cold weather, especially at this time of the year, that's when they fold offensively, and they're not the same. So they're going to New York, to MetLife Stadium, to play the Jets. That's not an ideal situation for Jalen Waddle and the Dolphins' passing offense in particular. This feels more like a Devon Achane game, which is why I would say Waddle is a higher-end flex rather than a must-start. Adonai Mitchell, I think he can be played. This guy is a guy I would personally play over somebody like Chris Godwin, maybe even Khalil Shakir, if I was really up to the task. Because Miami's defense is beatable. Their secondary is not strong, and Adonai Mitchell is a big play threat. John Mechie, I also think can be played, but I do think there's a tier difference between these two guys. I would consider Adonai Mitchell a relatively high-ish end flex, while John Mechie is probably on the mid-tier. But if you go look at my rankings on the week, both these guys, like, I actually consider them relatively good flex options this week. I think they're both better than Malik Washington. I would bench Malik Washington, and of course, I'm also going to bench Nick Westbrook-Akine. He is not sniffing anybody's lineups. The Denver Broncos at the Las Vegas Raiders. There's no must-starts in here, and I will tell you this. I moved some rankings around because when I ranked the wide receivers earlier in the week in the video, I said Troy Franklin is the number one. Well, I was dumb, and I wasn't looking close enough at the snap count and the routes run, which I always call bottom line metrics. And if you look at those, you'll see that Troy Franklin is not only the number 2 in routes run and snap counts recently, he's the number 3 behind Pat Bryant now. So Troy Franklin is descending at a bad time of the year for you if you've been riding Troy Franklin lately. Now, I still do think he's a better play than Pat Bryant because I do think there's still that connection there with Bo Nix, but Sutton to me is the better play at this point. I would play Sutton, then I'd play Franklin, then I would play Trey Tucker in Las Vegas, and then Pat Bryant. But I will say this, keep a very, very, very close eye on Pat Bryant moving forward, because this could be a guy you could pick up off waivers and potentially win your league. And I think even this week he's playable. Not that anybody will, but this is kind of a statement right here to say you need to be watching very closely with Pat Bryant and the rest of the wide receivers in Denver. Tyler Lockett obviously is a sit as well. The Los Angeles Rams at the Arizona Cardinals. Davante Adams made the switch this week and put him over Puka in my rankings because Davante just feels like such a touchdown lock that you can't ignore it anymore. Puka, his problem is, like, in order for him to outperform Davante, one of a couple things has to happen. Either one, he doesn't get in the end zone, Davante, or number 2, Puka just gets so much volume that it outweighs a Davante touchdown. Either way, it's kind of feeling unlikely to happen at this point, and especially in this matchup where they're coming in pissed off against the Cardinals' weak defense. I'll play Davante over Puka, but they're still both high-end must-starts. Michael Wilson, no Marvin Harrison equals must-play Michael Wilson. Run it back, baby. I don't care what the matchup is. Jacoby Brissett has gotten it done against everybody. This is a guy I'd immediately put in my lineup over Justin Jefferson. I'd immediately put him in over A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Lad McConkey, Jalen Waddle. A lot of guys I would play Michael Wilson over. So if you have him right now, you need to utilize him in your starting lineup in Week 14. And I will say this, I am taking a blind trick shot right here because I don't know who it's going to be, but I do know someone in Arizona will also get targets, and I'm going to say Trent Sherfield Sr. That's the guy I'm going to say. He's been in the league for a couple years. He's been around town. I do think that with Greg Dortch now on the IR, someone will step up in this offense, and I'm going to say Trent Sherfield. I could be wildly off base on this one, but I'll play him over Jordan Whittington. I just think he's probably the answer, but I could be very wrong. It's a blind shot I'm taking. The Chicago Bears at the Green Bay Packers. Get ready and buckle up because this matchup is wild. So the biggest piece of news, I would argue, there's actually 2 big pieces of news in this matchup. Jaden Reed is coming back for Green Bay. That will absolutely shake up things in Green Bay's wide receiver room. Now, I don't think it's Jaden's week as far as being the best fantasy option yet in Green Bay. But I will say this, Christian Watson is on notice, but I don't think it's bad this week for him. So I'd say Watson is the top play still. Then I would say DJ Moore because Rome Odunze has been ruled out and ruled week to week moving forward. So DJ Moore is number 2 over Romeo Doubs, then Jaden Reed, and then Luther Burden and Olamide Zaccheaus at the bottom because I think both of those Bears wide receivers are going to be involved. And the bottom line is when Zaccheaus has been on the field this year, he has been used. And I do think they're pushing for Luther Burden, but who knows with Caleb? You never know. This guy spreads the ball around. And the bottom line is these are both quarterbacks that spread the ball a lot. They have a lot of wide receiver talent. I might be leaving Dontavian Wicks out of flex contention by being stupid. I'm going to bench Wicks fully knowing that he could have a good one in this one, and then I'll also bench Matthew Golden because that feels like a pretty easy one. But this is going to be a game to watch for wide receivers. Watch the trends in Chicago and Green Bay as far as wide receivers with Jaden Reed in and Rome Odunze out. Our next matchup, the Sunday night game, Houston Texans at Kansas City. I said this earlier in the week. This was a statement ranking for Rashee Rice this week because I actually think he might have a bad game. But I will say this, you're not benching Rashee Rice. You will not bench him. I will not advise anyone to bench him outright. But I do think Nico is a better play than Rashee Rice because Nico is going up against a much weaker secondary than Rashee Rice is. And I don't think Rashee Rice, while I like him a lot, I don't think he's in that category of Jamar Chase. I don't think he's in that category of Jackson Smith and Jigba, where I think matchup doesn't matter as much. I think it does here for Rashee Rice. Maybe he proves me wrong. I don't have a problem with being proven wrong, but that's the way I'm looking at it right now. So I'd play Nico over Rashee Rice, but they're both still must start. And I think Jaden Higgins at this point, guys, he's in contention every single week to be flexed. Like, this guy has been involved. They've been pushing all year for this to happen, and now it's starting to work. Like, he is working out as their wide receiver too, and I expect it to continue against the weaker secondary. So he's my favorite flex over Worthy and over Hollywood Brown. But I think both those guys are also really solid flex options as well. Just definitely a tier or two below Jaden Higgins as a flex option. And as far as the other Houston guys like Xavier Hutchinson and Christian Kirk, I could see one of them having a decent game, but I don't know who it is because it's always week to week with them. So I'm going to go ahead and put both of them on my bench. The wide receiver you want outside of Nico in Houston is going to be Jaden Higgins moving forward. And our last matchup, the Monday night game, Philly at the Los Angeles Chargers. This one feels weird, I will be honest, because there's a lot of things going on here. Jalen Hurts not playing that great. He's hit or miss. And then obviously we're going to have Justin Herbert. Like, he's going to play in this one, but who knows what he looks like. It feels weird having these guys as must plays, but I just can't envision benching them in most situations. Ladd McConkey, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. Now, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith both being must starts is a little confusing because I wouldn't play them if I had both of them on the same team. I would play A.J. Brown before I played Devonta Smith. But my point is, if you have A.J. Brown and your opponent has Devonta Smith, I think you could both play both guys because they both have an equal shot to go off in this game. Quentin Johnston is the best flex option. Keenan Allen is a solid one as well. My point is, I do think that both of these teams have an opportunistic matchup here, but I do not know how this one will go because I think both teams are very hit or miss at this point. So let me know what your wide receiver room looks like heading into week 14 in the comments below. And if you want to see the full top 30 wide receiver rankings on the week, click on this video right here.